Welcome to Behind the Build. I'm your host, Jonathan Jacobs, and I am here today with Jennifer Kudlats of StudioAC. StudioAC stands for the Studio for Architecture and Collaboration. Jen, thank you for having me in your home today.
Thank you so much for schlepping all the way across the city to be here. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. I will add that Jen and I are not alone. We have Russell here as well.
You might hear him whimper because that is his go-to form of communication.
And for those wondering who Russell is Jennifer's dog.
Right. It would be weird if Russell was whimpering and he wasn't my dog.
With that out of the way, let's embark on this journey. Jennifer, you started StudioAC with Andrew. Andrew Hill is your partner in the studio. You started 2015. We'll get to 2015, but I always like to start from before that. So
before that. Okay.
Yeah, before that. The fact that we went to the same high school, so that's kind of fun. Did you know when you were in high school that you wanted to do architecture? Did you know this?
The jury's kind of out on that because my memory is that I didn't, but I have a really good friend and she always likes to remind me that it has been a thing that I was curious about forever. In my storytelling of self,
yes,
I kind of remember it a little bit less directional than that. I went to Dalhousie. Mm-hmm. Coincidentally, actually, so did Andrew. That is where we met.
Yep.
I went to Dal and I just went there for like general arts, like continuation of high school. I really wanted to go to art school. I wanted to go to NASCAD. And my parents just weren't that supportive of that. 80s parents being struggling artists, go get a real job. Anyway, so I did general arts. And while I was there, I learned that I could do transfer credits at NASCAD. And so I was doing studio drawing classes, having the best time. And then I essentially just didn't have any courses that aligned to a specific major. So I met with somebody and they were like, yeah, you got to just apply for programs. You can look into dental school or med school or architecture school. And I was like, interesting. What's that? Anyway, so I applied for architecture school with a portfolio of nude drawings. That was it. It was 15 naked women. And I was fingers crossed, hope for the best. Obviously I was waitlisted with that, but I think that I was waitlisted, but there was maybe a sculpture in there too. I think that the drawings and the sculpture showed enough
This was mailed in or this was couriered?
Oh my God, no, I made a thing. I made a gigantic portfolio book, which in hindsight now, even as I'm saying this, that also could have played into it, the construction of the book. And I took it was 18 by 24. And I took this gigantic thing. It was so heavy. And I walked it to the architecture building and was like, please stake me. Anyway, I was just sort of well, there's, that was Hail Mary of, I hope I don't have to have an extra year of university.
Yeah.
Which now, when I think about it, that probably would have been awesome. Anyway, and so I was waitlisted and I got in, and I guess I suppose the drawings and the sculpture and the book, showed some kind of, I don't know, interesting spatial awareness. But, I think architecture schools are generally looking for students who come from varied backgrounds anyway, and don't necessarily expect you to know, anything about architecture before day one of architecture school.
Right.
So certainly I didn't showcase an apt knowledge of architecture at the time. And then it just became one of those things that the more I learned about, the more I loved. And honestly, it's just evolved from there. Architecture school was one thing. It was fascinating. It was really just a way of seeing the world. And I would recommend it to anybody, even if they didn't want to be an architect, because it just kind of, I don't know, it just sort of broke open everything I thought I knew to be true and allowed me to rebuild that. And that's just valuable no matter what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
Were you able to travel as a part of school?
Yeah, we did. We had work terms at Dal.
Yeah.
So I lived in New York for a little bit, which was amazing. I lived with 6 girls in a 2-bedroom apartment.
Sounds illegal.
For sure it was. We had loft beds and we were just all on top of each other. It was amazing. In my 20s. I remember thinking actually years later, before we started StudioAC, I almost moved back to New York to work for Andrew Berman, who's the architect that I worked for when I was there doing my work term. And when I was trying to figure out how to get back to New York, I was crunching the numbers and I'm thinking I don't know if I can live with 6 girls in a 2-bedroom apartment again. So it didn't happen. I stayed in Toronto.
And at what year was this after moving from New York to Toronto, back to Toronto? Because you grew up in Toronto.
I grew up in Toronto.
Yeah.
I went out to Dal, and then during my master's, I would have been in New York for 8 months to a year around that time. And that was probably in like 2008.
Okay.
Then I came back to Halifax, finished my thesis,
Yep.
and I was back in Toronto by 2010, 2009.
And where were you working as your first job?
KPMB.
Yeah.
You know, it's like we sort of talk about it like it's this finishing school in a way, because I think, you know, you go to university and you learn, you know, what you're going to learn in a school setting, but then in a work setting is completely different. So I was at KPMB and countless mentors there. Andrew was also at KPMB. He was a couple classes below me.
Okay.
So when I was working my first job, he was doing an internship, like a work term at KPMB, which is when our friendship like really popped off.
And previous to this, when you were in school, did you know each other?
Sort of.
Like in passing in the hall? In
passing in the hall, but because of the work terms,
right?
Like we didn't overlap too much.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. So then you became closer friends when you started working there.
Yeah. And then Andrew finished his thesis, came back to KPMB to work. I had been there for, you know, whatever, a year at that point. And I guess I'll just get into how it all started.
Tell me, Jen, how did it start?
So Andrew and I were working at KPMB, and we were just kind of buddies that we sat next to each other for a while. And you know your work friends, they're like, you spend every waking minute with them.
Yeah.
So that was great. And Andrew's very funny. I don't know if you've met him.
I've never met him. No.
He's great and he's brilliant and funny and the best. So anyway, we became fast friends, and we started working on some side projects together. I had a family friend that had bought a house. Did you hear Russell whimpering? I don't know if we're going to catch that on the audio. But
I'll recreate it. Yep.
Anyway, I had some family friends that bought a house, and they asked if I wanted to help them renovate it. And at this point, I had probably been at KPMB for 4 or 5 years at that point.
And
it was probably 5 years at that point.
Not to derail your story as you're going through this, but like what types of projects were, kind of in some way. What type of projects were you looking at when you are working on when you were there?
Oh, well, completely different scale. So
Right.
when I was at KPMB, I was working on a lot of office towers. I did like for 5 years, I basically came on, built the physical model for a tower, a Bremner Tower downtown.
Yeah.
And I came on building the model, and I stayed on through that project through schematic and then through DD construction drawings. And then when that project went into construction, even though I was super green and I didn't know anything, it was just kind of the timing of the way that the stars aligned. Some of the more senior people on that project one of them was on paternity leave. Anyway, a bunch of them left for a number of reasons.
You became the lead.
I became the person that they asked, do you want to see this project through construction?
Okay.
And I thought, wow, what an opportunity. But if I'm being honest, like even though I had drawn the whole building, I was in my 20s. I had never been on a construction site, honestly. And this was like an epic construction site. Like this is like a, 30-story building with like 3 levels of below grade that ties into the path system. Like it was complex. And I was like, yeah, okay. Like I'm my personality. Like I'm like, I can do anything. So I was like, throw me in, coach.
I got this.
Oh my gosh. Honestly, that building obviously took years to construct, and many memorable moments. I definitely stepped both feet, brand new construction boots, right into wet concrete.
Yep.
Just trudged the wet concrete through the site like a total noob. It was mortifying, and there were a lot of learning moments there that I take with me now. Like, I think about them all the time. And when I was young, I was a woman, I still am. But at the time, like, being a young woman on a construction site, on a huge construction site, we were doing that project with Ellis Dawn.
I was going to say in commercial construction, you're dealing with. And
they were like, oh, you're the architect. And I had to be like, yes, I am. But in my head, I was like, I think so. Like, so There was a lot of, imposter syndrome and fake it till you make it bravado that happened over years. And I think the combination of, like that sink or swim forced into construction, and then also dealing with the client directly on a multi-million-dollar, $200 million project. Having to navigate that maybe a little bit before I was ready, but you're never really ready for big things. So you just get ready. I think that kind of helped me gain the confidence later to think, okay, maybe we can do hard things. Maybe we can do things we don't think we're ready to do. Yeah. Because of my experience in construction on Bremner. So I was super naive, and I was on that project for a number of years. And I remember just thinking like, oh yeah, I drew that, but I didn't realize that it was going to feel like this, and I think, when you're just so new, somebody tells you like, draw a detail like this, and you are drawing it because you're told to draw it like that, but you're not necessarily thinking about the physical reality of it until you start to connect architectural drawing to construction. Yeah. And then you start to see that. So that was my experience at KPMB.
Do you still have the boots?
They've disintegrated since, because it was a number of years ago. I have new boots now. Okay. But I still have them somewhere. Yeah.
I feel like you should shadow box those. Right? Start of a big monumental portion of your career. That's a fun thing.
It's true. I like to tell that story about stepping both feet into the concrete because it was really shocking. Yeah. And it had been perfectly troweled. Oh, I'm sure. Everybody on site was like, "You asshole."
Yeah. Six concrete guys standing next to you being like, "I cannot believe we have to redo this."
I know. But obviously they had a good laugh. They're probably talking about it on a podcast right now too.
Oh, for sure they are. Probably next door. Okay. So fast forwarding.
I digressed. We got into construction, but I wanted to tell you.
Andrew.
Right.
Yeah. Yes. That's what I was saying. Fast forwarding past Bremner back to.
Right. Okay. I was working on an office tower. Andrew was working on some more institutional projects. Yeah. And on the side, I had a family friend. They had just bought a house and they asked if I wanted to help renovate it. And obviously I thought that sounds fun. And, I asked Andrew, like my best work buddy, do you want to work on this project, a little side project? We'll design it together and we'll build it and we'll just have some fun. There was no talk of like, let's start an office. It was just like, let's just do this thing on the side because why not? This is like personal context, but I actually feel, like when Andrew and I kind of talk about how it all came to be. At the time, both of us were in long distance relationships. And so all we had was time because his partner, I think was in LA, mine was in New York. And so we just had time to kind of hang out and not be distracted with other stuff, I guess. And so that played into it. Like, even though that was like sort of an innocuous personal detail, like it allowed us to engage in our sort of side practice in a way that was really quite full on. Yeah.
Well, and I feel like also meaningful because at this point now you're also connected to the project in a way that it's not commercial, it's not institutional. This is someone that you know.
Exactly.
And you're working with someone you really get along with.
Exactly. And so it really was just about fun, you know? And so we were, like evenings and weekends. That's kind of what we were doing. Yeah. And we worked on that project, and I think neither of us really anticipated how much we were going to learn on that project because we were so used to working at much larger scales with people that are reading the drawings really intensely. And, anybody that's building a building for KPMB, it's like, if it's in the KPMB drawings, like it's, gospel. But in residential construction, sometimes that's not the case, especially if nobody knows who you are. Our drawings were pretty good because we were trained well, but
byproducts of
the KPMB. Builder. Yeah, exactly. The builder was probably also a little bit more casual. So they kind of came at it from like, I can do this better than how you drew it. Right. And so it felt a little bit, with all due respect, like just a bunch of cowboys on a construction site doing whatever they wanted. And we couldn't be on site because we had full-time jobs. So we would show up on the weekends and think like, what is going on here? Anyway, so we learned a different kind of communication.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is completely different. Completely. It's completely different.
So we learned that on the go. And that project was really fun. We had a great time. And then we were posting that on Instagram because to age myself, it was also like the beginning of Instagram.
Okay.
So this was new.
Yeah.
And
some filters.
Yeah, Andrew and I were like posting, he would do a rendering and post it, and then I would like post a construction photo, and we kind of just had people like, hey, what are you guys doing?
And this is on your personal Instagram.
Yeah, we didn't have an office.
You had nothing at this point.
We barely had Instagram. I had 7 photos on my Instagram. This is like, it just started. And so people were like coming out of the woodwork. Do you remember when Facebook started?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was vehemently against it. I was a MySpace person.
Oh, you were? I was like so into it. But I remember sitting at my computer and just like finding every person I ever knew, I went to grade 2 with that person. I would like find them on Facebook. Okay. So I kind of feel like the beginning of Instagram was similar, where like you would just sort of find people that you hadn't seen since high school. Yeah. Maybe you were one of them that I was probably trying to like look up. And so I had all these people on my Instagram that I was like not current friends with, but sort of knew.
Yeah.
And I was posting these construction photos, and then they would say like, oh, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Are you doing projects on the side? Like, I just got a house with my new family. Can you do this reno?
Okay.
And then I was like, I guess, yeah. So we started getting work from Instagram.
This is the first I've heard of this.
Yeah. Like everyone wants a deal. So they were like, you guys look like you don't know what you're doing.
Is this a sponsorship?
No, honestly. And so I think like the perfect storm of this like moonlight project on the side, us having all the time, Instagram being a thing, we then got a second project. And then the realtor of that person bought a loft.
Right.
And there was a third project. And so all of a sudden, Andrew and I just like, we were just taking on these little projects and having so much fun. One of the projects that we did, the Broadview Loft, It was like our first project that went viral, and which was so cool at the time. I couldn't believe it. It was on Design.
Yeah. I remember.
We were like, what?
Yeah.
That probably made it go red.
That's okay. We're talking about audio levels.
He told me not to get too excited. Anyway, yeah, we worked on the Broadview Loft. That client was the realtor for the first project that we did, my family friend. So we met her through them.
Yeah.
Wait, I messed that up.
Okay, that's
Dave
fine.
Bierkick was the realtor. She was another pal. I don't know. They were all connected. It was all just like word of mouth.
Yep.
And that was such a cool, fun project that was really simple, super low budget. And that project was important for a number of reasons. It went viral, but also on that project, we worked with Whitaker.
First time.
Whitaker is a construction company. I'm sure you're familiar with them.
Yep.
But it's owned by James Aikenhead, who also I went to junior high with. He went to St. Andrews. And again, Instagram. He had reached out.
Wild.
Yeah, he had reached out at some point when we were posting construction stuff and said like, hey, I just wanted to reach out. I'm building these days. Do you want to touch base? And so when Andrew and I started working on the loft, we thought we need a different builder from the last project.
Right. This is almost 10 years ago now. This is what, 2015?
Yeah.
Yeah. Or 14, so in around there.
Yeah, 2015.
Yeah. Okay.
Or something like that. Anyway, we met with James and we worked on the loft together, and he was meticulous. And this project had a $40,000 budget, which like now is nothing. And we did.
It's a light fixture in some homes.
Honestly. Although like, we're just so proud of that.
Yeah, of course.
We did a lot with a little.
It's really hard.
We looked at the space and sort of said, okay, like, what needs to happen and what can just get painted. The bones of that project were beautiful, but we built this, what we called a bed box, which was not quite a room for her bed. It was a bachelor space. It wasn't quite a room. It was literally a box with a little archway cut out in it.
Yep.
And her mattress just sat in it. And then there was this kind of undulating curtain, and the curtain sort of divided the space in her closet and allowed the loft to kind of transform depending on, if the curtain was pulled fully or not. And so it basically, this, singular space kind of was allowed to be sort of bifurcated into 2 or 3 different sort of zones. Anyway, James worked on that with us early days. He was meticulous and amazing, and we had a great time, and we did a lot with a little, and we all thought, this is a good team.
Mm-hmm. If you're unfamiliar with this project, it is worth going and finding this online. 100%. It's a special project because of budget and also because of the age of all the practices involved.
Yeah.
It is completely worth looking up.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, and we just had a lot of fun on that project. There were, it was a beautiful sort of hard loft space, and we got to just put this little white bed box in there and do a bit of millwork and a bit of lighting and call it a day. Anyway, I feel like I digressed.
No, you haven't digressed at all. You were talking about the early inception of the projects that you've had that essentially led to the start of the practice.
Though, I'm sitting here thinking...
That's why I'm here.
I'm sitting here thinking, I wish Andrew was beside me, because sometimes I remember the storyline differently, and I'm trying to like picture him in my head right now being like, that's not the order of operations. That's not how it happened. Because basically for a while we were moonlighting, and then eventually it got to the point where we had enough work that we were thinking like, maybe this is going to be a thing.
Yeah, that financially we can do this.
Potentially.
I mean, because that's a big thing, right?
Well, yeah. To be honest, the financial part was the last part. It was more like
fair.
We had enough work that we thought this is hard just to do in evenings and weekends.
Right.
But we wanted to be really conservative about the fact that like, is this going to work?
Right.
Like we both live in downtown Toronto. We need to pay rent respectively.
Yeah.
And so we left KPMB staggered. I left first. He stayed, which allowed me to work on, be available during the day if things happen during the day.
Right, and then review later.
And then Andrew still was full-time StudioAC basically, but in evenings and weekends, and also at KPMB. So he was like really hustling.
Sounds completely unenjoyable.
I mean, listen, in some ways, like when I look back, I'm like, yeah, we were working our butts off, but
like 18 hours a day in some ways, right?
I know, but first of all, I mean, it was and still is like our passion.
Yes.
And also, again, from a personal life perspective, like partner's not in the picture at the time. We were young.
Yeah.
And Andrew's just eats and sleeps and breathes architecture. So he like also, which is always very inspiring to be around. So I think, we were just like, StudioAC at the time was like, it was fun, and we were just young and excitable, but it was a hustle. Like you're absolutely right. Like we were working 18 hours a day, and I'm almost not remiss to tell the story this way, but it kind of sucks to have to say like, this is the only way you can start a business. Cause I don't believe that. Like, I don't believe that you need to like give up your freedom just because that was my experience.
But it's interesting because you're saying that, and I don't feel like you were giving up the freedom, because I think that this was the freedom.
Okay. I love that. Yeah, it was.
Right.
I mean,
you were working on these large scale projects, and then you go from those large scale projects that you're literally walking into concrete, and now you get to go and design something for someone that and you get to go figure out how you're going to go work with a budget of $40,000 and design something that's interesting. And so you're leaving, and you're like all of a sudden immersed in this like passionate world.
Yeah. No,
that is
I love
completely different than what you're doing. So yeah, I think that's what it is.
Okay. Well, excellent spin. I love that. Because I do feel sometimes guilty now, like when I think about, the project that we did for peanuts or like working way into the evening, like, I want to get into this eventually, but a huge part of starting StudioAC was thinking about the actual practice of architecture and the work life balance, and these things that we have now learned what we don't want to do and what we never want our team to have to do. And so we've built something around that, which is kind of the opposite of this sort of beginning story. So all of this is to say the context of this is sort of how we began. And then we looked back and said, let's sleep reasonable amounts and have work-life balance. So so we left in a staggered way. We ended up getting the Annex Hotel early on. That was in 2016, which was a big project for us.
Don't take Russell's noises in the background as non-excitement about getting the Annex Hotel.
No.
That was exciting.
It's more his eagerness to get a cookie, which if he keeps that up, he will not be receiving.
Sorry, I took away from the Annex Hotel.
Yeah, we got the Annex Hotel, which was a big project for us, and a couple other kind of more sizable commissions. And then it was a moment of reckoning where Andrew and I kind of said, like, I think we might have a studio. I think we sort of walked backwards into this, and there might be a real business here. And so we had to kind of like, we both went away to sort of think like, okay, either we're staying in Toronto and we're going to start the studio and we're going to do this thing and we're going to make this work, or, you know, I was going to move to New York. Like it was like a moment.
Yeah, we'll just dissect this whole thing and blow it up.
And I remember being so nervous. I was like, I hope he chooses StudioAC. Anyway, he did.
What I have to also, sorry, what I always try to describe what I'm seeing when we talk about these things. And so one of the parts that I really love about doing this is watching the person that I'm talking with, currently you, get excited about this stage of your career. It is such an enjoyable thing to be able to see, because what you can't see right now is that Jen's smiling, thinking about this stage of her life and what this transformation was, going from working at a really large scale architecture practice to going out and taking the risk on your own. And it is a gargantuan step in life.
For sure.
That everyone I talk to does, but it doesn't grow old watching the excitement on your face as you talk about it. So sorry, go ahead.
No, I appreciate that so much, because you're right. I'm like, maybe you can hear it in my voice. I'm smiling. It was like it was a really pivotal moment. And I think, like, you know, I look back at my time at KPMB so incredibly fondly. They were all very supportive when Andrew and I both left, still are. And that's so special. And but as I was alluding to before, like in the years that have passed, there have been like a number of challenges to having our own practice. Obviously, like we were pretty new too when COVID happened, and I remember being glued to the TV thinking, oh my God, it's all coming down.
Should have gone to New York.
Well, it was terrifying. But then it turned out that construction was fine. Anyway, there were many like scary moments and learning moments and things that I think neither of us anticipated. Like we thought we were starting this studio to design and build buildings, which we've been doing and we are doing. And I think neither of us anticipated how critical it would be to us to really think through the design assignment of what does an architecture studio want to be now? How do we do this? How do we make it so that it's not the Jen and Andrew show? How do good leaders make good leaders? How do we lift up voices? How do we make sure that the work is what we want it to be and the team feels that they have ownership over the work that they do?
Right.
Because it's very much, studio for architecture and collaboration. The idea was never that it was going to be like one person does a drawing and that's what the project is. There's always multiple hands and multiple minds that touch any concept. And our team is incredibly talented.
Yeah, she's smiling again, talking with the team.
I am, it's true. But because every day I'm so grateful for how talented they are and how funny everyone is and how it's such a nice environment.
But so it sounds like that when you left, that brainstorming has paid off because it's allowed you to be able to figure out who are the right people to bring into this environment to be able to create what we want to create.
Yeah, it's the right people. And it's also, I think, very much the job of, I think we come up against this a lot because historically in architecture, many practices kind of work under this figurehead model, and that's fine for them. That's just a different thing, right? So sometimes you get practices that, it sounds like, and even me being on this podcast, like it sounds like StudioAC is Jen's, but it isn't at all. It's, I am one of 6 of us, and the practice would be incredibly different if any one of those 6 people were to leave or change and so there's been different iterations of the practice over the years, right? Because we are this 6 now. We've been different groups before, and as we're sort of growing, the team is kind of growing with us. So it's really starting to feel now like there's early days, like our first team members were students, because that's kind of, it was me and Andrew, and we were like, okay, well, let's get a summer student. Now we have obviously a full-time staff of incredibly talented, smart designers that are, I was joking with you before, but I was like, if you have all these questions about construction and everything, you should probably ask them.
And I said we would do fine. And so far, that's what the case is. So let's keep going.
Right. Because I forgot. I love talking.
No, but I think also, look, I've made a few little like corrections to the way in which you've suggested something in the way that I view it and the way that I think it can be viewed. And the reality is that at no point during the last almost half hour have you described this as your own project of your own, sorry, not project, but of your own practice.
Absolutely.
It hasn't been the case.
And I think genuinely, like, we just don't feel that way. It was so much a part of how Andrew and I talked about what do we want this to be for a number of reasons. I think the work is only better when there's just more strong minds kind of coming together. Mm-hmm. And it also just, everyone's just kind of happier because it's sort of, we're all sort of developing our own kind of concepts together. So it feels very much like almost like a school studio, where we're just sort of working on a number of projects. Everyone's excited about everyone else's projects. And,
right.
It's a vibe.
And so now at this point with the practice, because when prior to starting our recording, we were talking about some of that. I know that you've done some really, really like high level architecture, associated price tags with that. And you did say that at this stage of the practice, you're now looking at trying to refine that. For sure. So do you want to talk about that phase, or do you want to talk about the current phase?
No, I think, I guess it's all kind of connected. Like you start a business, or we started StudioAC thinking we knew what it was, thinking we knew it was going to be an architecture practice, I guess. But we're starting with little projects, little renos, and then that gives you an opportunity. At some point, someone's like, I'm tearing down my house. And we're like, oh my goodness, we are going to do a new build house from the ground up. And then, we're like, whoa.
Vanessa Fong, when I had her on, she was like, for the first time, I was going to be able to design windows. There's going to be a window schedule.
We were like, foundations. We can put them where we want. Although we can't really put them where we want because the lots were so skinny. It was like, they have to just go here. But even still, these things that just felt so exciting. And so first we got really good at doing kitchens. And then we were like, okay, a window schedule or a foundation drawing. And so, that evolves. And then while that's evolving, we're sort of like, okay, we're designing the practice and we want people to be happy and, make sure that we're not working overtime and this, that, and the other. And then simultaneously, we are evolving as a practice. The work we're doing, the things we're passionate about, the things we're learning as we go, the things that excite us, they change. And I think that's true in architecture, but it's just true in life. Yeah. The things that excite you when you're 20 are not the same things that excite you when you're 30 and 40. And it just changes. There's also realities of the world. There's realities of construction. There's realities of housing that change. And so our passion and our interests change. And those are, influenced by political climates and by, zoning in the city and, like I said, construction. But they're also influenced by people we meet and projects we work on and things that we, work on out of necessity and think, well, that was amazing. Or things that we work on because we think we want to, and then we look back and say, like, that was tough, and so you're constantly reevaluating.
Right. So
what I was alluding to before was that it's interesting, like every year or so has brought a different kind of wave of projects, whether it was like, okay, we started doing the new build wave in 2018, and then a couple years later COVID happened and we did a wave of projects in Prince Edward County. We started doing like projects out of the city, and that was the first time that we were really kind of getting into rural projects.
Right.
The rural projects then, they kind of ran the gamut. We had some rural projects that were like, high cost per square foot, finish level everywhere. And then we had some that were, our Devil's Glen project, which is a like very minimalist, subdued cabin that was built on the Bruce Peninsula. And the whole kind of ethos of that project was, we're going to work with a builder up there. We're not going to design fussy anything. We're going to typical details everywhere and cost-effective materials, but the project needs to celebrate the site, and it's more about the volume and the space. And it's okay if there's not a flush baseboard, and it's okay if, in the photos that we took of it, we barely photographed the kitchen, because the kitchen is what it needs to be. And everything else is about, the framing of the views and the connection back to the water, and this sort of the way that the structure kind of celebrates the light entering from skylights placed in, different sort of quadrants of the truss. And so it's kind of becomes like a volume and light game. And in doing that, we sort of realize, okay, maybe we can step back from fetishizing something like a baseboard detail.
Fetishizing.
Can I use that word?
Yeah, that was good. Oh, that's going in the bank.
Yeah. So that was an incredibly exciting project to us.
Right. Because
we all left that project thinking, what a successful kind of study and thesis and proof of, what can we distill architecture and an architectural experience to? And then in doing so, how can we kind of allow more people to have that, right? It doesn't have to necessarily be that every project is going to be, $1,000, $1,200 a square foot, right? Like that's not attainable for many. And so, the Devil's Glen project was a fraction of that.
Right.
And so that was really exciting. And we kind of have taken that. And in recent years, we've been doing a big push on multi-unit residential. And our multi-unit residential work kind of shares that ethos. It shares the idea that what is important is the layout, the space, the volume, the light.
Yep.
And it lets us say to whoever's building it, who is going to be more cost conscious about what the, kitchen millwork looks like, because it's a rental, but it lets us say like, yeah, okay, let's simplify the kitchen. It's white and we don't need to have a fussy marble shipped in from wherever. Like it can be something cost effective, but it's layout, its location, the broad strokes are an architectural experience for this, for this rental unit. And so we have a number of projects now in the studio, in construction as well, that are going up around the city that are so exciting in the office to us. And I think we're really feeling that excitement from, when we share them on Instagram, because they're creating affordable rental units that are beautiful. And they kind of share this concept that, we can do more. We can do a lot with a little. We just have to kind of step back from, for lack of reusing the word, but we have to step back a little bit from fetishizing the things that, are going to ultimately be renovatable. It doesn't, it's okay if the millwork is simplified or if the baseboard is applied. And so that's kind of the direction that we're in right now. We're really kind of paring down and simplifying.
And trying to fulfill, I guess, the needs of what we need in this city, which I've talked about with some others as well. And that is affordable homes.
Yeah. And we've been working with the city as well. We've had, a number of meetings with them to talk about, some of the zoning bylaws and some of the sort of like new changes, laneway housing and, multi-unit residential fourplexes, things like this. And just kind of talking through like what's working about those new rules, what still needs to evolve, and, putting those rules into like actuality when we draw it out and we say like, this is what you told us, but we think it's not quite working and here's why. So, yeah.
So I mean, it's because it's a big transition, right? It's going from designing something like a boutique hotel to a more simplified form of architecture.
Well, to be clear, as the studio kind of matures, we're working on that. We're also simultaneously, we've got retail projects in the mix, which are, they're fast and furious and usually lots of material and trendier in some regards because the turnover is higher. So there's still that. And we're always going to have custom residential, I think, in the portfolio. So there's still a number of houses. But I think just the way we think about them changes.
But it also allows you to be able to dabble in both, which to the point that you've made before, keeps everybody excited and engaged in what's in front of them, because they might be sourcing something or looking for something in a detail at one home that is $1,200 a square foot and $1,500 a square foot or whatever it's going to be. Then they got to go figure out how are they going to make $400 a square foot work.
Right. And I think the pushback is like, it's less about looking at the detail and figuring out like, how do you do the same thing but cheaper, and more about just asking yourself, like, does that matter? Like, does that detail matter? Does it pass the squint test?
Yeah. We internally, I don't talk about this much, but so, at Walden, we have one of our guys is certified in building science and passive house. And so we offer this kind of service where we look at like the building envelope and not just all the finishing details. Let's understand how we're going to make this place efficient and work well. You can renovate everything on the inside. Right. Right. Why? You don't always have to spend so much money on everything. You just don't.
So you want to edit our drawings?
If you want. Yeah. Yeah. You want
to detail the
we're doing it with some people now too. But we're not here to talk about us. We're here to talk about StudioAC.
Well, I'm like, I like this. We can like turn it around. Tell me about that.
This is not reversing. I'm not well equipped for that. So you've reached this point with your practice where you've got a core group of people, 6 people, you said at the practice. It sounds to me like everyone almost in some ways feels like they're a partner of the practice.
It's definitely, it feels like a really solid team that is, obviously some people have more experience than others, but even within that, like it to me at least, I don't know, maybe we could get them on here to comment, but I really do like it.
We should just call them in. I'm doing a podcast.
Oh my God, I put them on speaker right now. There's always something to learn from everybody, right? So even though, somebody might have a little bit more experience than somebody else, like, we've got our like studio group chat where we're always sort of sharing things that we've seen, things that are exciting, things, and everybody's got different experience levels and different passion points and whatever. So it's like, it's just kind of a melting pot of passionate people. So
do you feel like what you're doing professionally cascades into your personal life as well? Like, do you feel like when you're traveling or you're going to other cities that you're constantly taking a look at the architecture of where you are, or
for sure, do
you turn it off?
No.
Okay.
For sure. Yeah. Okay. So going back to our studio group chat.
Yeah.
Anytime anybody goes away, it's constantly just like, here are photos of buildings and things that we're looking at.
Look at the detail in this bathroom. We should execute on this.
Yes, but not the fetishized detail. It's usually like, look at this.
I would hope so.
Yeah. So, I guess going back to what I was saying initially, like in a way it's hard to turn it off, because I think a lot of architecture is a way of seeing the world. And so whether it's like, oh, I'm so excited about this window detail, like, or just I'm in a new city and the scale of this street is beautiful. And so I feel some kind of way because, I was just in Boston. And great city.
God, great city.
Oh, I had never been. And no, that's not true. But I had been many years ago, and I just appreciated it in such a different way. And obviously I went to go look at some fantastic buildings while I was there. But even beyond that, like when I was just getting a coffee in the morning or, walking through the park, or like I'm thinking.
It's so good.
Yeah, I'm thinking about space. I'm thinking about like urbanity. I'm thinking about, different areas of Boston that were sort of like the older quarters that, feel some kind of way because of the scale of the buildings, and you sort of feel like nestled in there in a way that I think, we then internalize and take back and think, when you're citing a new project, and, we're so used to in Toronto, like stepping back from the street and, giving everything a wide berth, but it's like, is that really the right thing? Like, should we be doing that? I don't really know. Like, it's really nice to have like an urban wall that just sort of like holds you. So I think, there's like the intentional going to look at buildings and study buildings and photograph buildings. And then there's also the unintentional, like architecture just kind of, it's a way of seeing the world. And it's also, whether we're working one-on-one, like in a residential setting, or on a more urban scale, it's really also like about people. So, which is a huge part of what we do. And what I love about what we do is like the people part of it. So you're constantly thinking about how people use space.
Right. Yeah. And the connectivity and the experience, when, and you get it. Like if you go into that coffee shop in Boston, and you're either going to feel like, oh, I could come to this place every day if I moved here, or I'm never coming back here.
For sure. I didn't have any I'm never coming back here experiences
in Boston, right?
Yeah, I loved it.
My wife and I, when we were there, we like put on our walking shoes and we didn't take a cab anywhere. We walked the entire city.
It's such a walkable city,
right? And you walk from the pier where all the restaurants and everything are, and you walk through like Chinatown. You go into the downtown core, and like you're just immersed, in everything. And they have old, beautiful structures tied into these beautiful modern pieces. It's
no, and they had this whole like kind of like newer area, like I don't know if it was newer. No, it is newer. I could definitely tell. It was like the seaport area.
Yep.
And yeah, it just made me think a lot about like Toronto's waterfront and like what we're doing there, trying to do. You know, like, yeah, it's always sort of, you know, so inspiring and interesting to see travel and see different cities and buildings and what they're doing. And so you kind of, you can't not think about it as it pertains to your job or my job rather, because it's just the way that I think and the way that I see the world.
There are a few people I've spoken to who will say like when they're going away, they will make a part of their travel about going and seeing specific sites in a city. For sure. Which makes complete sense. And then the tactile feel, like you walk up to it and you just start touching it.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And
smiling again. See, you're thinking about somewhere you've been that you did that.
Well, I'm thinking about experiences that I've had that have been like visceral, where you walk into a building and you like feel it in your heart.
Okay. Where's one?
Okay. Well, this is probably the most memorable because I was so young, but also, and so it was one of my first experiences of seeing like capital A architecture. But I was in Switzerland and I went to see Zumthor's Val's baths. And so it was a visceral experience because I was immersed in water. So I also was like in a bathhouse that like, you know, I felt like all of my senses were like just radiating. But it was one of my first experiences of seeing capital A architecture. And everything was thoughtful, you know, like, so just a view out the window was perfectly framed and there was obviously like a ledge for you to sit on so that you would receive that perfectly framed moment. And like everything was considered and the building smelled a certain way and it felt a certain way and it even sounded a certain way. Like you could hear your breath in a way. Like
so you're inside of that building, you're in water and you're talking about how you can hear your breath. You can smell not smell your breath.
I really hope I can't smell my breath.
It's weird. I don't even know how that came out. Nonetheless, let's keep that in. So you know, the picture frame of the window. What I'm curious is, if you're in water, is it warm water? Is it cold water? Like, is this an experience that you can withstand, or is this like I'm experiencing this and I got to get out?
Okay, so the whole thesis of the bathhouse is that it's a series of pools.
Okay.
That some of them are warm, some of them are cold. They're all temperature changes, and the size of the room changes depending on what the experience is meant to be.
Oh, interesting.
So it's kind of like this dense stone building that's sort of carved out of the side of a mountain, and it's all built out of the stone from that quarry of, you know, where Val's Switzerland is. And essentially it's a series of pools. And so there's like the main pool, which is, I'm trying to just say this from memory. There's the main pool that like I recall being like whatever, just like regular room temperature water. But then you could go into, you know, a small room that has like a super high ceiling and the water is scented like roses.
Oh, really?
Or like there would be a room where there's like a steam area and then there probably was a cold plunge. And so you're kind of, what's interesting about it, obviously it's, you know, it's meant to be a bathhouse, it's a spa.
Yeah.
But you're experiencing this architecture while your like heart rate is changing.
Yeah.
And all of your senses are like kind of illuminated differently. And I think it's such a showcase, like it's such a strong showcase of how like our awareness of space just changes with all of these different inputs and contexts. And so that one has always stuck out to me. One, because as I said, it was my first experience of architecture, but it also was just epic because I was just being challenged, right? I was being challenged by like wading through water. And, you know, when you're in a room that is intentionally meant to echo, right? So you'd go into a room and you'd hum and you'd feel the reverberation of that humming, right? So it's like meditative in that sense.
Is it lit? I don't know about this. So
okay, you have homework. You have to look up this building.
I'm realizing that as you describe it.
It's lit perfectly.
Okay.
Obviously. It's, again, because it's kind of built into the side of a mountain, there are areas of it that almost look like a deep crack in the ceiling, and it's actually like a super deep skylight, but you just see the like little bit of natural light kind of filtering through. And then obviously there's just super intentional lighting. There's some big windows on the side. There's an area of it that's like indoor, outdoor.
So it's a completely immersive experience with all your senses.
Yeah. And I think like at the time too, I had probably just graduated school, and I remember reading Juani Plasma's Eyes of the Skin, which is also about architecture and experiencing architecture through the touch and all of our senses, which is interesting too. Like, I think, we often think about the way that something looks, but there's so much more to architecture and to the experience of space than just what something looks like, you know? And I think like, we talk about like even when something kind of like smells like a memory, and that exists, right? Like when, fresh cut grass and things like this, that all sort of tie into those experiences. So I think like that was all fresh on my mind too. And then I was in this building and I just thought like, well, I'm a different person than I was before visiting this building.
Yeah. There's pre and post.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so you've traveled different places of the world. Is there a specific? I've asked this to a few different people, but I've got different responses. Is there a specific locale that you wish that you could have a piece of your architecture in?
Whoa!
I know, right? I know. Yeah, there's no time to prep for this one.
Okay, I'm gonna say no.
Okay.
There's not like one place that I wish I could have my architecture in, because I think one of the things that I've grown to love is just that every project kind of comes out of its constraints that are all varied and different. So like I was saying, when we started doing rural projects, that was a whole new experience for us, because all of a sudden we weren't just locked into like, well, the foundations just have to be offset from the property line by, 4 feet or whatever. So we have the freedom to site, so I've always thought like, like just having that freedom to, be on this vast piece of land, like that's fun. But I think it's less about that and more about whatever the interesting constraints are. So different climates are interesting to me. Yeah. Just because we haven't done them yet, studying, like obviously we're working on, early days of a project that's potentially in a warmer climate. And it's just funny. We get to think about the details totally different. There's no snow. Yeah. That changes the way that we could imagine, the building envelope. Yes. And so I think like
the roof capacity.
Yeah.
Right. Engineering is going to be different. Everything's going to be different.
Yeah. I spent a bit of time in Mexico.
There's some good architecture in Mexico.
Yeah. Mexico City was unbelievable. Yeah. But the last couple of years, I've started my year in a small town called San Agustinillo, which is like a little beach town in Mexico, and in sort of like Oaxaca area. And I met this guy who was, I don't know, selling me juice at a time that I was like,
not tequila.
No, not tequila.
Yeah,
I
good
was
tequila
like,
there.
Water. It was so hot. It was kombucha, obviously. And anyway, he was sketching a building. I was actually there with my friend Meg, who runs Caisson Hardware. I don't know if you are familiar with them. Anyway, so she's
Meg
also
Graham?
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
Meg Cassidy.
Cassidy, sorry. I don't know why I said Meg Graham. Yeah.
Anyway, so she was with me. She's also an architect.
Yep.
And we were drinking kombucha, and we look over, and this guy's like drawing up a plan. And so Meg's like super friendly, and she was just like, "What are you drawing?" That's my impression of Meg. Anyway, he was like, "I'm designing my house."
Oh, that's
and
cool.
So immediately we were like, "Well, we're a couple of architects. Like, show us what you got."
Here's our stuff on Instagram.
It was like, flex your chops. What are you drawing here? So we start looking at the house that he's designing, and just the way that he was not an architect, but the way that he was thinking about the house was, had to do so much with they're building up on a hill, and, the climate is just so hot. So like every house kind of has this like big open palapa, and everything is just like open to the air. Like the kitchen is just open to the air. And as long as there's like a big kind of overhang for when it does rain, like that's kind of it. That's your house. The only rooms that really need to be enclosed is like maybe the bathroom and sometimes the bedrooms if you want to have a little bit of air conditioning in there. So like the whole kind of like way of thinking about a living space was completely different.
Yeah.
And then even the public-private, because of how it was sort of like nestled into the side of the hill. And it just got us kind of thinking about, just building in different climates, but also just like a completely different way of thinking about space, right? Like when I was first sort of looking at these drawings, I thought like, oh, I would never do that. And then as he was kind of explaining to me, like how they live. Yeah. I'm like, okay. That makes sense. Yeah, sure. Like, and so I guess.
You want to work remote?
You're hired. I guess like to your question, it's not necessarily that like one place is so exciting more than another. It's just constantly learning. They say like architects in a way are like jack of all trades, master of none. And
sure.
Kind of because we sort of are tasked with knowing a little bit about all the things and then knowing when we need to bring a consultant on that knows a lot about any one thing.
Yeah. That's like project management.
Yeah. And that's kind of what we do, right? So the more like little bits we get to learn about, right? And whether it's, I'm talking residential now, but like, we're working on a dentist's office and the details that we're learning about, like, things that how they, sanitize the tools or the materials that they need to use, or, we're just like learning a little bit about that, and enough so we can get excited and make the design dope, but then also leaving room to bring the consultants in that like know the details. So
right.
Long-winded way of saying that I don't think there's one specific place or program, but it's just kind of the like excitement of knowing that any project's constraints are, can be like that moment of inspiration, I guess.
Yeah. I don't think that you're alone in that. I think that there are a lot of people that feel the same way. And from those that I've spoken to, I would say that no one has actually said like, I want to have no one said that. No one, a specific spot.
Does that make you feel like it's a bad question?
No, it doesn't. Because the engagement I get out of it is what I just got, and it was worth it. It was so worth it. So outside of the work, a large part of it has been travel and finding these amazing little places that you can call home for a short period of time. Are there other things that you like to do in your free time to be able to take your mind off of running a practice?
Yes.
Like what?
Okay.
What are some of your hobbies?
Part of why I spend time in Mexico is yoga.
Yep.
And yoga recently has been one of the only things that really lets me like put my phone down. And I think like part of it, like the meditation breathwork side of that too, like just really allows me to connect to like body and brain and just put everything down, which I've realized in the last few years has been so much more important than ever, because it is my passion. I love the studio. I love the work, but it's all consuming all the time. So if you don't have something to like let you put it down,
become present.
Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah, it's
tough. And then you're in my house right now, so you can see my garden behind you, which is also
turning. Yep.
Which is also a big passion point. I've got my veggies in the back and my flowers in the front that I love to tend to. But really, yoga's been kind of, I would say, the constant,
the go-to.
Yeah.
And outside of that, I assume walks with Russell.
Yes. Oh, Russell sometimes comes to the yoga studio.
Oh, does he?
Yeah, he's got a mean downward dog. He loves rules.
Isn't that like calling like Brazil nuts in Brazil nuts, when it's just he's got a downward?
Right. Yes.
There's no dog.
That's good. That's a me kind of joke.
That's all I am, unfortunately. Those jokes that's pretty much all I've got. Oh, they're brutal.
We love a brutal joke at StudioAC.
God. Sorry, Wendy. Anyhow, Jen, I thank you so much. I feel like we could keep talking about many of these things. And I will say to you that at some point, one of the other things that we will want to do with this is to do roundtables to talk about locations and building on a cliff and building in different climates and doing all that kind of stuff and bring more people together to have those conversations. Yeah. So we'll keep in touch about that. I really do thank you for inviting me into your home and for sharing your experiences and to talk about your incredible studio. What we have not talked about, and I know that most people don't like hearing it, but I'm going to say it anyways, is that StudioAC is highly acclaimed practice. I know, yeah.
No, I'm so proud. I'm so proud.
And so this is like, they're on Azure, DesignLines Practice of the Year for 2023. And that's amazing because that's local bred and that's beautiful. And then they are also on like Hypebeast and a whole bunch of other places online. So if you are unfamiliar with StudioAC, you shouldn't be. You should go look up their stuff. I've only said this once before with someone else. So it's an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I had the best time.